Hey, I'm back with another video. It's been a couple months, and I figured since we're like a quarter of the way into the season, I'm going to try and maybe over the next couple weeks assess every team just a little bit, just to get a feel of how every team is kind of stacking up. And I thought there was no better way to start that than to start at the bottom with the Detroit Pistons. Because I think a lot of the discourse around the Pistons this year has been really weird. People are acting as though this team is completely directionless and hopeless, and that they got here through just disastrous moves one after the other. But I would like to argue that, first of all, Troy Weaver has really not done that bad of a job, and I think he's just gotten like pretty unlucky and gotten the short end of the stick in a lot of these situations. And the construction of this roster, while it is terrible, it's not as though any one player on this team is like torpedoing the ship, if you will. Like, Monty Williams is not doing a great job. I think that's a big problem. Monty Williams' rotations are really weird. For some reason, Asar Thompson's minutes keep dipping up and down, and so do Jaden Ivey's. And I really wish he would maybe play Isaiah Livers more in the starting lineup. I really don't understand why we're still going on with Killian Hayes as though that's a thing. But we're going to talk about all the X's and O's in a minute. I just want to maybe do the Troy Weaver apologist thing, and I'm going to start by we'll just talk about the draft, the last four drafts that he's had to do. So 2020, we start with the Troy Weaver experience with Killian Hayes and Isaiah Stewart. Obviously, the kill pick didn't end up working out. Like, we can all see that Killian Hayes is a disaster. It is, like, barely an NBA player. But like at the time, that was like a pretty reasonable consensus pick for them. A versatile, lengthy, raw French point guard with potential on both sides of the floor seemed really interesting at the time, and especially with a team that was starting the rebuild and had very little like in the way of potential. I think that pick actually wasn't that bad at the time at all. It wasn't a reach to me. And yeah, the Halliburton thing ended up if they had Tyrese Halliburton right now, things would be completely different. But a lot of teams passed on him. And then obviously the Beef Stew pick was a massive steal. So like in that way, I would say that like the 2020 draft really didn't go all that poorly for them. Like a lot of teams missed in that draft. I would say really most of the teams in the lottery actually, in the long run, I would say most of the teams in that lottery ended up like not doing too great with their picks. You can think of like Isaac Okoro, Obi Toppin, Denny Avdia. Like none of these guys really ended up becoming stars. And they've still got potential, but like nothing more than role players. Then 2021 is obviously the Cade draft. They had to take him. They made the right pick there. Was that the year they got Livers? They got Livers either that year or I think they got Livers in 2021, yeah. So they got Livers. That was kind of a big deal. I don't remember when they moved on from Luke Kennard. They moved on from Luke Kennard at some point during this time. That was kind of a not super great thing, because if they had Luke Kennard right now, they'd probably be doing a lot better as well. But, it happens. So far, like, two drafts in, like, Troy really wasn't doing all that bad. Yeah, they weren't making splashes in free agency, and yeah, like, there was still, like, a bunch of problems. They were, like, but, like, it's a rebuilding team. These things happen, right? And so then the next year, they get into the 2022 draft, and they get Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey, which is a really interesting duo of players, because next to Cade, neither of them can shoot. Like, coming out of college, we knew that Jaden Ivey wasn't going to be an elite three-point shooter. We knew he had like some bursts to him. We knew he had like a little bit of playmaking upside, but it was really just his like monstrous athleticism that was really the draw for him. And then like he's got the potential to be a jump shooter. I especially think his mid-range game could come along going forward. I really need to talk slower in these videos. So Jaden Ivey, like next to Cade on the wing, seemed like a really interesting fit. We'll talk about the speed dynamics between the two of them later. And then Duren, a super raw, super athletic, physically gifted center like him. I think that was a fantastic pick. We can all see that was a bit of a steal. So far, like 3 drafts in, I really think Troy was doing pretty well. I think other than the kill pick, he'd hit on all their picks and gotten some pretty good steals like throughout. Especially with those late first rounders. Obviously Livers is pretty good. And they were collecting like a pretty solid group. Oh, I forgot to mention Sadiq Bey. I guess that's kind of the next big move he made, the Sadiq Bey for James Wiseman trade. I don't think it was a direct trade between them, the Warriors and the Hawks. I think they traded Sadiq for 5 then rerouted all 5 of those to the Warriors in a set, but it ended up working out the same way. So obviously Wiseman has been fucking terrible. I think anyone in Detroit will tell you that the James Wiseman and Marvin Bagley minutes are like hell on earth and completely unwatchable, and that's true. Because James Wiseman doesn't really know how to play NBA basketball yet, so for some reason. So yeah, that was a pretty big disaster, but I think it ended up being like not super consequential. Like Sadiq Bey is good, and he would obviously be helping them a lot right now, but it's not as though Sadiq Bey was like this star that he threw away for like nothing. He's like a good role player sometimes. Like most of the time he's pretty good, and he's a good 3-point shooter, which obviously would help them right now. And then we get to this year's draft, and then I think they make maybe the coolest move of the entire thing, which is taking Ausar Thompson 5th overall. That was also pretty unlucky because they had the highest odds to get the number 1 pick, or at least tied for it. And then between the 3 teams, like their worst case scenario was to get number 5, and they ended up, falling to number 5. So that's not super great. But they ended up getting Ausar anyway, who's arguably been the 2nd or 3rd best rookie this year. Definitely top 5, like inarguably. And I think Ausar Thompson, if you haven't been watching Detroit Pistons games this year, which I would understand, which is the entire point of this video, then you haven't been paying attention to Ausar Thompson, who I think is going to win a Defensive Player of the Year eventually. He's a fucking animal on that end. He's super athletic, long, he's got amazing instincts. He's one of the bounciest players you'll ever see. So I think that pick was amazing. I don't remember, did they have another first rounder in this year? I don't think so. I don't think they did. They also traded for Marvin Bagley at some point, and they extended him. And the Marvin Bagley contract, by the way, like really not that bad. It's like 3 years, $35 million. That's like not bad at all. Even if it's like 2 years, $35 million, that's really not like a terribly consequential amount of money to give like a guy who's going to come off the books next year. So, really, I like the big moves that Troy has made, and we can obviously talk about like the fact that they've done very little in free agency. Like, I mean, they've added like Boyan, they added some shooting this year, but like, I would argue that, like, first of all, Detroit is not, like, a huge market. Like, historically, Detroit has not been the team that draws the big superstars every year. And usually when they get guys, they have to pay out the ass for no reason to get them. Like, think of, the John Lure contract, for example. Just an ungodly amount of money for no reason to a guy who's, like, wasn't even very good. I think... like, this year, they actually did kind of okay in the free agency market. They added Joe Harris, who's, like, obviously been, like, historically a very good shooter. Now, the ACL tear has kind of set him back quite a bit, but I still think he could be good. They added Monte Morris, who's, another shooter, another good table setter, who I think should be getting Killian Hayes' minutes when he comes back from injury. And then, they added another guy. God, I can't remember. They added another shooter, but it's neither here nor there who it was. They added someone else. And I think, like, when you look at this roster, like, obviously, when you look at it in its totality now, it looks like really bad. But I would say if you look at every single significant move Troy has made, and the most important ones have been the draft picks, like, every single year he has, like, hit on the pick. Like, if you go back to last year, like, you would not argue that the Pistons should have taken, God, they had the 5th pick, right? Yes, they had the 5th pick. So you couldn't argue that they should have taken... You could argue maybe they should have taken, like, Shadon Sharp or even Ben Mathurin, but I think Isaiah Livers is perfectly fine. Or not Isaiah Livers, sorry. Jaden Ivey is perfectly fine in comparison. Then you could argue, like, 2021, were they going to take Jalen Green or Evan Mobley? Absolutely not. 2023, like... Thompson was clearly the best player available, and he's clearly like over exceeded expectations, if anything. And then like Jalen Duren as well, that's a steal. Isaiah Stewart, steal. Now the kill pick definitely would have taken some guys over him, but like at the time that wasn't that bad. Yeah, the Killian Hayes pick wasn't great, but like I mean that wasn't a huge deal. Like, there were a lot of misses in that draft, and it was pretty understandable. And so, like, I really don't see how you can look at all this and, like, just throw it all on Troy Weaver as though he's been, like, this terrible GM. He hasn't been great, but, like, every single time he's been presented to the opportunity to take an NBA player who is better than where they were, like, slated to be taken, like, he takes them. And it's not as though there is, like, some masterful sharpshooter that he misses on, because most of the time that just doesn't really exist in the position that the Pistons are usually drafting. It just so happens that they just don't manage to land shooters in the draft. Jesus Christ! Can you guys shut up? Sorry! And then now I guess we have to talk about the fucking, hang on. There's so much yelling outside, it's not even funny. Anyway, so let's talk about how they can fix this. And I'm going to say something that I think everyone's kind of thinking, but it's kind of also going to make everyone a little uncomfortable when I say it out loud. And that is that they need to move one of the core four guys, or sharply reduce one of their roles, or completely change the starting lineup. Or I think a big problem, they have a weird problem with Jalen Duren because he's developed into such a solid center so fast. And I'm not saying that Jalen Duren is this great player. Really, the only reason he's so good right now is his physicality. He's really not like that. His basketball IQ hasn't really gotten that far. He's not like this extremely intelligent center. He's just like a big bruiser and like a lob threat. He's not like a great defender by no any means. He misses his rotations all the time. He's kind of slow on his feet. He will like clean these things up, of course, but the fact that he's like this good already has kind of meant that they have to start him. And I think in the ideal situation, then he'd still be on the bench right now. But anyway, him, Thompson, Jaden Ivey, and Cade, you cannot play 4 non-shooters on the starting lineup if you can. So I think a solution now would be to move Jaden Ivey to the bench, which early in the season, people were really uncomfortable with that, but I think realistically, the stylistic differences between him and Cade are just going to like fuck up the offense in most cases, and I think another shooter on the floor would make the offense flow a lot better. Jaden Ivey likes to push the pace insanely fast. He likes to make these crazy rambunctious plays, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it creates a good offense. But Cade likes to, play with pace. He likes to like set guys up. He likes to run the pick and roll. He likes to find his spots in the mid-range. He likes to kind of dig in a little bit. When he catches the ball and when he comes down with a rebound, he's not looking to like just like burst out into the fast break and get it 2 points as fast as possible. And I think that spark plug off the bench, which Jaden Ivey could provide now, could actually just like benefit the second unit a lot because their second unit's kind of thin. So I think Livers in the starting lineup, Joe Harris when he comes back. I think he might be back now. I honestly don't know. But one of their shooters in place of Ivy. And then it would be Asar, Duren, Cade, and Bogdanovich. And that's a little better. You have maybe 2.5 shooters depending on the night. I would still like to see them run... and then obviously Isaiah Stewart's going to have to come off the bench. So that's going to have to happen. But I would like to see them maybe run even like Asar Thompson off the bench as well, because Asar can kind of do both. Asar is like he's not a good catch and shoot player by any means, but he's a good cutter. He's like extremely athletic, and he's a good secondary playmaker. And then he can also run the fast break. He creates offense off the bounce extremely quickly, but in like he has a very herky-jerky way in which he like kind of moves sometimes, and he can kind of run the fast pace and the slow pace like well at the same time. So I think he fits perfectly with both Cade and Ivy. So I don't really see like a huge disadvantage to him in either lineup. And then like long term, I think I'm not really sure what Ivy's ceiling is. There's I see a world where Jaden Ivey has like a lot of similarities to like Tyrese Maxey. Now there are obvious stylistic similarities in like their burst and like their general like demeanor as players, but like, okay, maybe let's retract that. Let me take back. They're both fast. That's like the only similarity between them right now. But again, I don't know what Ivy's ceiling is. I think he has the potential to be a very good player. I think his jump shot could come along pretty well. He kind of reminds me of like what I thought Karis LeVert was going to be, what Karis LeVert was before he dislocated his ankle. Like he's this extremely just like viscerally, like can't turn him off. There's no stop and start. He is only on 100 all the time, like super fast, sometimes unreliable scoring like punch. And that would have been Karis LeVert's all-star year. People forget that. And I think in the long term that might be a problem because they're probably going to just have to keep him up the bench. I just don't see him and Cade. I just don't think him and Cade works just stylistically. I think they're too different. If one of them could become a more reliable three-point shooter, then I think it could work a little better. And if Ivy could maybe if either of them could clean up their turnovers, I think that would also help them a lot. But I mean, like as of right now, neither of them are complete projects, and Cade is obviously the better player, and Cade is going to be better like long term. They've also invested like way more into Cade. They've made this whole thing about him. So it's important that I think they right the ship with him. And so yeah, I think in the long term they're gonna have to trade one of these guys. They're gonna have to probably diminish Ivy's role like now. But I don't think this is like over. I don't think like this team is like a pit of negativity. I think they just got really unfortunate with the way they had to build the roster in order to acquire the most talent. And I think if they were to play that talent correctly, if they were to run lineups that actually made a little bit more sense and use Ivy and Cade in ways which maximized their skills individually, I think they could probably make a more competent team now and maybe get some value for Ivy if they like decide to move on from him, which I don't know if that should be the number one option right now. There's nothing wrong with being, an elite sixth man. Like Tyler Hero might make the all-star team this year. Well, I guess he's not coming off the bench anymore, but you get it. I don't really think I have anything else to say about the Pistons. Monty Williams do a better job, and Cade's super underrated. All right, see ya.